So the task for Ricoeur is this. It's to continue asking questions, right? Ontotheology's loss it reveals a lot of questions that answer had covered up, right? If you don't look at that as a true answer, but is pointing to something else, a whole world of inquiry opens up. And Ricoeur is mostly interested in interrogating language. Okay? So he starts out with this. He says that the philosopher cannot be the preacher that's demanded to bring a post-religious age into order, right? Again, he's the philosopher, he's not the preacher. The philosopher remains a cultural institution. A second point that he makes, nihilism is not over, because we still mourn for the loss of the gods. Last time we talked about that period of confusion that atheism ushers in, right? And we're still in that age of confusion. We still mourn the loss of gods. We still have a nostalgia that pulls us back toward it. Because there's something really simple about accepting guilt as true, right? Or knowing that you're condemned, and then knowing that there's forgiveness. It makes everything so easy, right? To have that sense of absolution and be purged of it. And even if you sin again on Saturday night, every Sunday morning, forgiveness awaits. And you can rejoice because you're born again, right? And you can do that over and over and over again and never get anywhere. But that cycle's so comforting, we miss it once it's gone. We want it back. And so that's why we're in this state of confusion. For Ricoeur, the good philosopher remains suspended between atheism and faith, right? Philosophers don't deal with religion per se. They're out of their element there. They're suspended here, right? They understand the critique and its importance, but they don't hover there because they have convictions that need to be expressed or that need to emerge. So they're hovering here. They're after the stage of atheism, they accept it, but they're not content there, right? They want to push forward into a state of faith. And for Ricoeur, that's philosophy. Here's a quote. He says, the philosopher's responsibility is to think, that is, to dig beneath the surface of the present struggle between reductive hermeneutics and a positive hermeneutics of repetition until he has discovered the level of questioning that makes possible a mediation between religion and faith by way of atheism. Right? So you don't want a reductive hermeneutics that makes the answer too simple, and you're not yet to a point of a repetition that allows, the way that Jesus was a repetition of Moses, right? It was a meaningful repetition, not a parroting of the same words or phrases over and over, right? So between these two, the philosopher needs to dig beneath the surface of the present struggle until there's a level of questioning that opens up a new way. And given that that's the task that he assigns to the philosopher, he then makes good on the task, and he decides to do a little detour through Heidegger. So here we go with Heidegger. Three things about Heidegger quick. First of all, he goes to Heidegger because he wants a movement to language. And he argues that via Heidegger, that a relationship to word opens an obedience devoid of ethical implications. Quote, we must try to gain access by means of a non-ethical approach to the problem of autonomy and obedience. Two, he talks about hearkening as an attitude that allows this. Hearkening for him is a pre-ethical stage. It's a mode of being which is not yet a mode of doing, and which thus avoids the alternative of subjection and revolt. Three, he says, word occurs. Something is said of which I am neither the source nor the master. So here's kind of what this looks like. If you have an imperative, you have the choice to obey or rebel. And that puts it in the world of acting. And that's already framing it in a very traditionally moralistic sort of way. Right? Here's the imperative, do this. To be good, do this, and avoid that. Well, now I have that choice. And this is the system of ethics, right? Any ethical system gives you a set of imperatives that you need to either abide by or reject. And then take the consequences of that as you will. What Ricoeur is saying is that before we even get to that, because this is the world of acting, that word itself occurs. And in its occurrence, we can hearken to it. And there's a relationship that's open which is an obedience in hearing the word and just hearing it. Just listening to it itself is an ethical possibility. It's a pre-ethical possibility, right? It's a mode of being which allows a certain kind of goodness that never gets trapped in this at all. So that's what he takes from Heidegger, and then he starts to develop it. So, are we okay moving on through the development? Okay, I think this will make more sense as we go also.
I guess one quick question, isn't that hearkening kind of like a pretty temporary way of being? Like, how could you do that forever?
How can you not?
I don't know, you just learn the rules and follow them.
But what if you're always hearkening?
How?
To listen, to wait for word to speak, and then to attend to the speaking of word. Wait on it. Ask me again at the end of class.
I will.
Write it down. Okay. So on page 450, he talks about language as an alternative to accusation, right? Because he's still trying to figure out a way past accusation, and the way that he wants to do that is through language. So here are two quick quotes and then a summation. The first quote: "In the occurrence of word, I do not have anything at my command. I do not impose myself. I am led beyond the feelings of anxiety and concern. This situation of non-mastery is the origin of both obedience and freedom." Right? When you hear a word, you don't have to be controlled or controlling, right? You're receiving the word, and the word comes outside of you, but before you become anxious about not being the speaker of the word or concerned about what the word might mean, you hear it first. Right? And you're not in control, but you're not being controlled. There's nothing to rebel against at this point, right? There's no accusation or condemnation. You're hearkening to it. It occurs, and you're part of its occurrence. You receive it as it occurs. 2, prior to all moral instruction and all moralism, we perceive in the act of hearkening the foundation of other modes of listening, following and not following. This hearkening implies a belonging to, which constitutes pre-ethical obedience, right? So if like I have a daughter, and I can ask my daughter, did you listen to me, or are you listening to me? And what I mean by listen is really, are your actions along the lines of what I have spoken, right? To listen to me means behaving in a certain way. But what Kerr's talking about is another mode of listening. Again, it's this one over here, right? It's the hearkening form of listening, which it's a belonging to. It's an obedience, because you can obey the summons of word to listen before you can figure out what to do to act, right? And it's that shift to the pre-ethical that he's interested in making through Heidegger. Keeping silent, and this is number 3 for Kerr, is the origin of both hearkening and obedience. Right? And he talks, he quotes a lot of Heidegger throughout this section, but you can say a lot of words and not be silent or not prevent, right? It's not about whether you're speaking or not. Keeping silence is a way of preserving a space for something to be said. Right? It's not a lazy attitude. It's not acting nonchalant. Right? It requires a lot of intentionality to really hearken to the world, to really be listening, and not watchful, because that's ocular-centric, right? But I mean to really listen for anywhere in the world where a sound might be uttered or a word might be spoken that you could obey and then think about. But obedience isn't this kind of listen, right? Obedience is just part of that hearkening and keeping silent. We okay to move on another step? Okay. The importance for ethics is this. 1, an ethics that exists prior to the morality of it opens up an ethics that exists prior to the morality of obligation. It's an ethics of the desire to be or the effort to exist. Okay? And he goes back to Spinoza for a lot of the background for this. According to Spinoza, ethics is the process of moving from slavery to freedom and happiness that involves conatus, which is the unfolding of effort as itself. Okay? So that the desire to be or the effort to exist is a natural emergence. That doesn't, it's a struggle. It's not that kind of like ontotheological moral struggle, right? It's just the effort that it takes to become who you are, to be as you are, and to allow that to emerge. Ricoeur also indicates how desire needs to be worked in, replicating the Platonic eros. Ethics requires affirming being in spite of our innate nothingness. Most structures philosophically, most philosophical or theological anthropologies discuss human beings as having some amount of nothingness and some amount of being within them, right? And that nothingness is the reservoir that allows us to have potential, right? This piece of chalk has very little nothingness to it. It's all actuality. Humans aren't like a piece of chalk, right? There's a nothingness that we have that allows for certain things to be presented, created, destroyed, and negated that's fairly unique. And so for Ricoeur, the ethics that he wants to build out from Spinoza is an affirming being in spite of innate nothingness. 2, Freud and Nietzsche, for Ricoeur, tackle moralistic substitutions of reason for desire and happiness as a drive for action. And they're right in doing so, right? So what he's saying is that whereas Spinoza looks at the effort to be as a path toward happiness, which is something desirable, right? I mean, that's good. That's not the normal ethical model, right? The normal ethical model says thou ought, and it gives you all the reasons for that ought, and those reasons have very, very little to do with human desires and happiness, right? And in fact, they're often opposed to what one might desire or what one might think would lead toward happiness, right? And so he's saying that Nietzsche and Freud say that's wrong. He's like, great, yeah, you're right, that is wrong. But there's still a space for ethics. Ricoeur sides with Spinoza in believing that humans are fallible instead of corrupt. We're not born evil, we're born fallible. We make mistakes. And that's okay. But in seeing us as fallible instead of wholly fallen or wholly irredeemable or wholly in need in this sort of ought-based correction, Ricoeur wants to embrace a model for ethics that comes before the interposition of reason, right? Or duty, or law, or things like that with all those capital letters. He's trying to advocate for a different model.